say the blessing together, and then I have a meaty topic for tonight. No pun intended, since it's about animals. All right, let's say the blessing together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al sfirat haomer. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us with commandments and commands us to count the Omer. And we announce the day of the Omer, first in Hebrew, Hayom Echad Va'arba'im Yom Shehem Chamisha Shavuot V'Shisha Yamim LaOmer, which means that today is 41 days, which corresponds to 5 weeks and 6 days of the Omer. So it's Shabbat, and on Shabbat, one of the things that we are supposed to do is we're supposed to experience Shabbat as if it's a taste of the world to come, which means a taste of this vision of a world redeemed, and so that's why we're not trying the, if you are someone who follows the halacha about Shabbat, you're not changing things and trying to improve things, but you're really honoring and focusing on and acknowledging the beautiful parts of our world. That's not what I'm going to do here. But we'll come back to that idea. So I want to talk about something that I just learned about, and it is blowing my mind. We're all learning, so I'm sure that some of you will be like, how are you just learning about this? But so I did not know, and I have recently been reading about the connection between animal classification and zoology and racism. And so, first of all, shout out to a podcast that I learned about from my good friend Rabbi Callie. And this podcast is called Witch Please, and it's a podcast about Harry Potter. And it's very different from the other podcasts that I love, Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. But this podcast, they do a great job of just tearing the books apart. And yet they also clearly love the world of Harry Potter. They're very critical of a lot of things, and they are also very critical of J.K. Rowling, especially with her transphobic comments. And the way they each episode is like looking at a specific issue. So they, I think, have actually had 2 episodes on animal relationships, and just because I think there's a lot to talk about, they had a follow-up one recently. And so this is where I first learned about this concept, from this podcast about Harry Potter. So you never know. But then I've also been reading some really interesting articles, and I'll share the link to one of the articles that I found interesting and not too overwhelming, but it's basically is talking about how we have these classification of different animals that we all learn about when we're kids, and that they seem like these harmless things, like, yeah, it's a way of classifying knowledge and learning more about the different animals. But the even though they seem harmless, there's an implied hierarchy of inherent value among different animals. And then what I've been learning about that's in this realm and this topic is that then sort of the evolution of that classification of animals turning into classification of humans, and that sort of as these classifications evolved, they became more and more complex. But even just the idea of like a primitive species comes from these classifications, and how dangerous those ideas have been, and how harmful they've been. And so certainly um, with racism against people of color. And you can also, it's not a long leap to think about how that relates to Hitler's idea of the perfect Aryan race. And so um, I just had never heard of this before. So I was really fascinated, and I wanted to share this idea that this exists with you. If this is something, if you're someone like me who I know many of us have been spending a lot of time, um, especially in the last year, thinking, trying to learn more about inherent racism that exists in our country. This is an aspect of it that I hadn't heard about before, but I can, I mean, in a lot of it makes sense to me that it has, in how it's impacted our ideas um, about how we classify humans, which is really unfortunate. And so, anyway, I bring this to you tonight on Shabbat, not to say that that's part of a perfect world, um, but to say this is part, in order to have a vision for a redeemed world, you have to be able to acknowledge what's broken about the world that we are in. And so there are some different steps, right? So on Shabbat, we're not necessarily doing the work to fix those problems. But for me, part of that reflection period of Shabbat is about recognizing what's good in our world and where do we really need to be focusing our energy, so that then when it comes to the rest of the week, I know where I want to focus my energy in pursuing justice. And so um, this is something that definitely I think is is a topic that personally that I want to be learning more about and read more about, so that I can have a better understanding of the racism that's historically been part of our country, our world, and has no doubt has implications for um, the form of racism that exists today. So um, I will link at least one article in the chat. I would love to hear if this is something that you've studied, you've learned about. I would love to know. I would love to have a conversation with you so that I can continue learning, because I feel like I'm just scratching the surface of what's involved here. So thanks for being open to this idea with me, and look forward to hearing what you think. And